Hi, my name is Claire Johnson, and I am a fifth year student at the University of Toledo, and I'll be giving a presentation on database security. The purpose of this report is to create an overall understanding of the reasons why it is important for someone to secure a database that they are working with or have created. This report is covering basic security for a database and the key components to ensuring that a database is safe from outside threats and user error. This report is written for the class Computer and Network Security as a final project at the University of Toledo. The reason that I chose this topic to write about is because I had previous experience in working with databases. I was an intern at a company where I was given access to PHP files that I needed to update in order to help with a company-wide data migration project. Since the class I am taking is about computer and network security, I found that I would enjoy writing about something that I am familiar with, and I was curious to understand the reasons and ideas behind securing databases. The purpose for writing this report is to give someone who has never had experience in database security a clear and simple way of understanding the basics behind it. I'm going to go into further details about why it is important to secure a database by expressing what commonly threatens them and errors that users themselves can create. I'll then talk about practices that are commonly used to prevent attackers. And then finally, I am also going to give insight to what security policies are used for different types of databases. I end my research with a conclusion of what I talk about and a page of references that I used to do my research. Database security is generally defined as the tools, processes, measures, and controls meant to withhold the integrity, confidentiality, and availability of a database. The entire point of having security for a database is to prevent the spread of confidential information, stop the destruction of that data, and overall restrict access of the data. Without database security, companies all over the world would lose their most important information to hackers, who would then use the data for their own personal gain, and to people who don't understand how to properly take care of the database. The easier it is to access information from a database, the bigger the threat there is to it. Hackers find and invent new ways to break into databases every day. Even though the database's security is the main subject of this report, there are many items that connect to the database that need to be included in the same range of security. One of the items that typically needs protection is the database system. The data in the system is typically the most important part of the database. The DBMS, or Database Management System, is another item in need of protection. The DBMS is the software that allows users to interact with the database using SQL queries to add, delete, update, and create new tables and data to a database. Other items that need protecting include the applications that rely on the database's data in order to process, such as websites that take usernames and passwords. Usernames and passwords are one of the many types of data that gets inserted into a database. Another item in need of protection is the physical database itself. This is usually protected by a lock on a door that only specific employees have access to. The final item is the network infrastructure, which is the combination of hardware and software that allows connection to the network and gives access to the user's communication through devices, the internet, and applications. Without the needed protection for all of these items surrounding the database, anyone has the ability to connect to and disrupt the database. If we're going to secure a database, we need to know what exactly it is we are defending against. There are many different types of threats to a database that can be classified. One threat that is common when it comes to databases is malware. Malware, also known as malicious software, is a type of attack that seeks out the vulnerabilities within the database and uses them to break in. It can be distributed a number of ways, including emails, websites, software, and files that users unintentionally install to their PC. A common threat that almost doesn't seem like a threat is human error. Users can most definitely be a threat to their own databases simply because of misuse. Data can be accidentally deleted, files can be overwritten, large amounts of data can be lost during a company-wide data migration, and the integration of new software can turn bad if not handled properly. SQL injection is another kind of commonly occurring threat that happens to databases that are undersecured. SQL is the language that is used to communicate directly with the database tables and data. SQL injections are the process of hackers inserting malicious code in SQL that could potentially destroy the database. The SQL injections could come from web page input, where you're required to type in a username and password information, which a user then gives a SQL statement that is unintentionally run on your database without your knowledge through the web page. A denial of service attack, also known as DOS, is also common in the world of threatening a database. Its purpose is to make a database resource such as a website, application, or server completely unavailable to a user in order to decrease the quality of a service to the qualified user. There are different ways to make the services unavailable. Most of those ways are the manipulation of resources such as code, network packets, and resources that handle the vulnerabilities of the database. The last threat I will talk about is bad permission management. Permission management is the allowance of users who have the right clearance to use certain aspects of the database. Without the separation of usability, anyone in a company could log into the database and change anything they desire. Some ways that attackers gain access through the database is by obtaining passwords of default accounts that were not changed by permission management, or by using an inactive account. Also, if a user is accidentally given the wrong credentials, attackers could find out and try to exploit their access to the database by using scams or trying other strategies to then launch malware on their PC. Without knowing the possible threats to a database, you would not know where to begin in the process of protecting it. With all of these different threats, we can now talk about ways to prevent attackers from gaining access to the important data and achieving their goal in deception and destruction. Now that we know what we need to protect and defend against in order to keep our database safe, we can talk about some practices that are commonly used to secure databases. There are a couple of security practices that are very useful in preventing attackers. One of those practices is encryption. Encrypting is a practice where plain text is turned into a ciphertext using a key that is formulated by a mathematical algorithm. That key is needed for both encrypting and decrypting the text. What we can do with encryption for a database is to take the data that is important, such as a password for a certain user, and encrypt it so another user of this database would only see the ciphertext of that password. Only a user with higher access should be able to see the actual data using the key to decrypt it. Authentication is one of the more important practices because most database systems require users to enter a username and password to gain access. Other types of authentication includes certificate-based authentication, which is a form of digital identity that can be based off of a person's driver's license or passport. Then there is biometrics, which takes a biological aspect of a person It could be fingerprint scanning, retina scanning, facial recognition, and voice recognition stored in a database in top secret security situations. And finally, there's token-based authentication, where a user is required to enter credentials one time, and then they are given a unique encrypted string of random characters. This token can be used instead of retyping credentials over and over again to gain access to the database. Auditing is a way for companies to check that all of the database security measures are working properly, such as the firewalls, physical security, and intrusion detection services. Usually audits are performed by a third-party organization, and that way potential insider threats within the company are not able to affect the examination in order to get accurate results. Audits aren't the most efficient way to check all of your security because the results only show you a small portion of what is going on throughout your database security. Database backups are another useful practice. The backups are essentially copies of the database that are used in a situation where corruption, accidental deletion, or attack of data occurs. Cloud-based backups can be used as well as on-premise backups. Some companies use both cloud-based and on-premise backups. The average cost of data lost per record is $150, with the average amount of records being breached at 26,000. The lasting effect of data loss can be as long as multiple years. Implementing backups ensures that the important information can be recovered in case of extreme data loss. These are some of the many ways to prevent attackers from taking or corrupting important data within a company's database. Without these practices, information would be stolen and given to the wrong people everywhere. There would be no confidentiality to anyone's lives or companies. Creating policies that your company should follow in order to secure a database is a great way to give employees specific roles in database security. In system security policies, if the database system that is being used is smaller and easily manageable within the users, then the database administrator can obtain the role of security administrator. If the database system is larger, then a group of people or a specially picked person can acquire the role of security administrator. Database user management places security administrators in charge of determining who has access to alter, create, and delete users within the database system. User authentication that we talked about in practices is typically a part of system security policies. Operating system security is usually up to the database administrator to create and delete files pertaining to the database. Data security policies are used to determine what users in the system are permitted to perform certain actions on the object, such as select, insert, and delete. So some users might be able to select and insert, but not delete data from the database. The level of importance that the data has also determines how much security is placed on it. If the data is not the most sensitive information, then the data security policy does not need to be as nearly intense. User security policies are used to make sure that all employees have the right access to the databases based on the level of clearance that they have. This would include usernames and passwords and creating roles for administrative privilege management. With user access for databases, it should be part of the policy for employees to change their passwords frequently or when that employee shares that password with someone with unauthorized access. Roles are used to divide up different tasks in administrative responsibilities. Some of the responsibilities could be divided up as object creation and maintenance, database tuning and performance, creating new users, and granting privileges to the users, routine database operation, and emergency database recovery. Password management policies are effective when users' passwords are older and they have tried too many attempts to log in, and a history of passwords is needed. Account locking is used in this policy to deter users from trying to guess a password. After a certain number of attempts to log in, the user will be locked out of the account for a specified amount of time. DBAs also create a maximum lifetime for a password so that if a user has not changed the password in a while, they will be forced to when it expires. Password history is good for this policy because it remembers previous passwords a user has created and will not allow them to use it again. Having an auditing policy is also important because checking to make sure that everything is working as it should and that attackers aren't able to gain unauthorized access to the database. Auditing policies are typically in place in case there is questionable activity going on within the system. Usually there is a general audit that will then lead to a specific type of audit that will focus more on certain aspects that are causing the suspicious activity. All these policies are usually in place for database management systems for a lot of companies and are used worldwide. It is important to have these in place so that employees have an idea of what their roles are within database security. This presentation should have given you a good idea of why database security is important and given you further information on the inner workings of the policies and practices that are used to prevent common threats and attackers. This presentation is good for people who don't know anything about databases and the security behind it and would like a brief overview of certain aspects. This presentation goes over the main topics of practices, common threats, policies, and the overall importance of securing databases, but it does not include every single subject within that. There's much more information out there on the subject, and I hope that this was enough to get someone started on their own research of database security. This last page has a list of references that I used to do my research. Thank you for watching.